So we're going to continue on our journey through Proverbs in chapter 2, starting at verse 6. We have a video on it already. If you haven't seen that, be sure to go back and watch it because it's going to launch us, as you can see from these notes, into the conversation that we're going to continue to have. But for now, excuse me, let's go ahead and read all of 6 through 15, and maybe we'll divide it some more, or maybe we'll find some interesting relationships to be found and some context between these sets of verses. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will watch over you, understanding will guard you, delivering you from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech, who forsake the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perverseness of evil, men whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. So we've talked about this just a little bit already, but the first thing I want to do is recognize the breaks in this set of verses. You can see for the Lord gives wisdom. We have a subject, the Lord, and that goes through verse 8, right? And he's storing up sound wisdom, guarding paths. We're going to start talking about these verbs today in this video. But I want to go ahead and remind us about how we might be inclined to break up this next set of verses as well as we prepare to get into them. Do you see? Then you will understand. So this is another one of those shifts in subject, right? We're always trying to pay attention to who is the subject of the sentence, right? Who's doing the action, who's receiving the action. Those sorts of things are important. And so with the subject change, it's sort of a clue for us that we might be beginning a different kind of topic. They might be intimately related, but it might be a different kind of thing. And we find, then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity in every good path. And actually, right, this is fascinating. For wisdom will come into your heart. Discretion will watch over you. Knowledge, I missed that one, will be pleasant. Understanding will guard you. We find that now we have subjects. You start as the subject, you do. But then you become the object. And the things which you were receiving actually become the subjects. Now, there's so many questions to ask. And you find that this is happening through, well, actually about verse 11. Because then we begin to have a new explanation, right? Delivering you from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech, right? And so we have a new section that is describing men of a different kind of path. And the things which are protecting you, but then also what they are protecting you from, right? So we have this sort of 3-section breakup here. And this would actually be our 3 sections after the first section, so 4 total. And we'll get to all of these sections. I just wanted to go ahead and make sure to break that down to make sure we're all on the same page of, well, why aren't we doing, 6 through 10 all as one block, or, where does 11 go, sort of thing. And notice that the break in between 11 and 12 is a little tricky because there's a comma and not a period. So it does go together. Right? It's all one flowing string of ideas, but it is a shift due to the subjects, objects, etc., which we can talk about more later. All right, so that's sort of the breakdown of the section, and let's go ahead and get back into 6 through 8, which we began to talk about last video. And remember, we're talking about the role that the Lord is having in this process, and how he's the one, and this was the last thing well, actually, that was 2 videos ago. But one of the things we need to remember is that it's the Lord who's making this both possible and effective. And we want to get into the verbs of 7 and 8 now. So we talked about giving wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. So he stores up. What does he store up? Sound wisdom For who? For the upright. Okay. He is a shield. A shield to who? Those who walk in integrity. He also guards what? The paths of what? Justice, and watches over the way of who? His saints. All right. So there's a lot of really pretty rhythm in these verses. But let's take it a bit at a time. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity. There's quite a few questions we could ask, right? So what does it mean to store up wisdom? That's a strange phrase. Store up wisdom. Why for the upright? He is a shield to those who walk in integrity. Well, what does it mean to be a shield? Shield from what? And why for those who walk in integrity? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and finish. Guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. So, what does it look like for God to guard those paths? Why does he guard them? And we sort of talked about that last time, but we might have more to say today. And watching over the way of his saints. What does that mean? And why? What does it mean for God to watch over? What does it have to do with justice? What is the connection between all these ways, right? The walking, the paths, the way. What does all this have to do with each other? That's what we're gonna. That's the question that we're gonna kind of hold in our minds as we continue. How does all this connect? Okay, that's kind of our meta question today. Of we have these different things God's doing, but how do they fit together, right? How is this happening? What's going on? And maybe we'll get to answer it today, maybe we won't. We'll see. But it's certainly a question worth answering. Okay. Store up. What does it mean to store up wisdom? And why for the upright? Okay, I'm just going to kind of block those out. What does it mean to store up wisdom? Well, if we go back to the dam analogy that we used in the last video, so if you didn't see that, be sure to go back and get the fuller explanation. If God is functioning like a dam, which maintains the integrity of the lake behind it, but allows through the overflow, which in God's case is a perpetual and infinite overflow, then to store up wisdom for the upright seems like it's a combination, perhaps, maintaining his own integrity, which of course is vital. God must always remain the same. And what a blessing that is to us. But the outflow, the overflow, right, is not just a spontaneous, it's not just a random spontaneous overflow that like pours out over the top. It's an intentional letting out, right? He stores it up, not just to be poured out on the world, but he stores it up, sound wisdom, for the upright, right? So it's not random. It's directed, right? He's laying it out for the sake of the upright. And why the upright? Who else would it be for, right? I mean, I think upright here is, and integrity and justice, all of these things are being knit together into the concept of wisdom, right? And if we look at verse 9, then you will understand righteousness, justice, equity, every good path. And this is an echo back to Proverbs 1, if you'll remember with me. Let's, again, sorry for the scrolling. Let's check that real quick. Which verse? Yeah, it's in verse 3. To receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. That is not coincidence. I'll save you a bit of scrolling for that one. I should have remembered that feature. Proverbs 1:3. This is a very important callback. We've talked about the process that leads up to the fear of the Lord, which, as Proverbs 1 tells us, is the beginning of knowledge. And now we recognize that the Lord is the one storing up, intentionally preserving this wisdom for those who've come for it, and he's giving it out to them freely of his own will and out of his abundance. And the people who are going to receive it are the people who have made their way upon these right paths, the paths that he has laid out for them, the paths that are, in fact, his very own paths. Because to say, he is a shield to those who walk in integrity and guards the paths of justice, right? Over the way of his saints. Well, what is the way of his saints? Let's answer that one real quick. What is the way? Well, easy answer. That would be Jesus, right? Who is God, who is justice, who is integrity, who is the upright man of all men, right? So, to return back to our question, why for the upright? Well, these are the people that it's been saved for. The people who have become wise, who know the fear of the Lord. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity. What does it mean for the Lord to be a shield? A shield from what? Well, the verses go on to tell us about that. He's going to be a shield from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech, right? Those who forsake the paths of uprightness, right? Those people who are on the fringes, who are off to the side, who are drawing people away from the paths, who walk in the ways of darkness rather than in the ways of light, like Ephesians talks about, who rejoice in doing evil. Ooh, there's a lot to talk about there. And delight in the perverseness of evil. That is extraordinarily dangerous. So these are the people that we need to be, that those who are upright and have integrity must be shielded from. Because who are the people who are walking in the darkness going to attack? Well, it's the people they can see, right? And the people they can most easily see are the people who are walking in the light. So basically, we're shielded from those who are in verse 12 and 15, those who walk in evil ways. That's who we need to be shielded from. And that's why the paths of justice must be guarded, and guarded not by man, but by God, right? We humans do have a responsibility towards justice, towards maintaining it as best we can in the world, but ultimately the paths of justice that we walk are maintained and guarded by God. In fact, he is, right, if we continue to extend the I am the way, the truth, and the life metaphor into, well, not a metaphor, the image that Christ uses for himself, when we extend it into what we're talking about here, that Christ would be both the shield and the way, and the guard of the path, you can imagine, and I'm just picturing, I'm just picturing, Christ with this incredible Spartan shield, uh, except, of course, it's probably not proper to draw him wielding a shield because he is indeed the shield itself. He used his own body to become the shield, right? Um, but gosh, who would try to get on this path, right? When you see something like that guarding it. Um, and wouldn't you feel safer walking on this path with a guard like that on it? And so if you don't know, and this is pretty interesting, if you don't know that the path is guarded, then you may be disinclined to take the path, because the path that is being offered is not an easy path. You see, the difference, it would seem to me, between and this is maybe a bit of a tangent, but it seems pertinent. Um, another question would be, what is the difference between the ways God watches over and those he doesn't? Right? You could imagine some possibilities. Is it difficulty? Uh, Maybe, in a sense. Is it direction? Almost certainly. Maybe all of the above. But one that seems to maybe stand out right now is that idea of darkness, right? Of evil, of crookedness. And what occurred to me that started me on this tangent is that because the ways of God are guarded, right? Because this is the way of justice, like we drew in the last video. And these are the paths the upright take. Right? And the people of integrity take. Well, something unique about these paths, right, is that they are illuminated. They are seen. So it's not necessarily that the path isn't difficult, but the difficulty can be seen. And so if you weren't aware that the path is guarded, is safe, is good, is protected, then you might be disinclined to take a path that is so visibly difficult and tread down a way that may appear safer, but that you can't actually know is safer because it's in darkness, right? For the very same reason that those who are in the dark can more easily attack those in the light because they can be seen. Those in the light may be inclined to step off the path into the dark paths they can't see because they can see the difficulty of the path that has been illuminated. That's why it's vital for us to understand that it is God himself who guards the paths. It is God himself who stores the wisdom, right? No one is going to break in, steal, and destroy God's wisdom. It's God himself who shields those who walk in integrity. And it's God himself who is on watch, right? The God who never sleeps, who never rests, who is always present, aware, and attentive. And so these are the differences. The primary difference, I suppose, God himself is the path, guards the path, illumines the path, and probably lots of other things. But those are the ones we've talked about so far. And there's a balance to this. That you might be inclined to think that a path that God is guarding, right? When we think back to some of the other videos we've worked on in the passages in Proverbs 1, but also when we talked in yes, this section of the notes, particularly in verse 4, when we were talking about the idea of an adventure, and we talked about this in Proverbs 1 as well, but the idea of an adventure carries through. You might be inclined to think, well, how could a path that God guards, that God illumines, right, that God is himself, how could this be a path that's an adventure, that's a quest? It's like, well, again, just because God is doing these things doesn't mean the path itself is not difficult, is not a challenge, is not a worthy quest and endeavor. In fact, it is the most worthy endeavor, and it is in fact the most honest endeavor because God is guarding it and maintaining its integrity. It won't slip out from under you. You will have to step off it because it is the God who is maintaining it. And so the possibility of an adventure on this path is not only immense, but it is guaranteed, and that's why you need wisdom to walk it, right? Do you need, because this is an interesting question, and this is sorry, there was a sound outside. This is an interesting question. Do you need wisdom? Well, here, let me phrase it like this. If you're of the mind that these guarded paths might seem just too straight, too easy, too simple, right? That only someone who's relatively naive would imagine it like this. Well, why do you need wisdom? To walk the paths God guards, and I'm going to add maintains over here, right? That God guards and maintains and watches. And I'll just say of God for this little note over here. Because surely isn't this easier? And of course the answer is no. Right? Though when we say the way is Christ, we don't just mean he blazed a trail that we get to just easily walk behind because he's done all the work. Maybe comparatively to his struggle. And even that's arguable because when we are called to walk in the way of Christ, we are called to walk his way. And his was a way of suffering, of self-sacrifice, of pain and of death, right? And the most abundant love, peace, and joy that you can imagine. But the most abundant love, peace, and joy does not negate the way of suffering. And so to navigate a way like that, wisdom is required because the way of justice is indeed also the way of suffering and the way of Jesus Christ. And wisdom is in fact required to walk on that way because it is not easy, because it is not simple, because though it may be narrow and it may be straight, it is profoundly difficult. And without the light of Christ, without him maintaining the integrity of the path, right? Without God guarding the ways of the upright and the just, it wouldn't even be possible to walk it. The path wouldn't exist for us, but God maintains it on our behalf and then gives us what we need in order to walk it in his power and in his grace and his glory. This is what it's like for God to walk over, or to store up the wisdom, to shield and to guard and to watch. So do you need it? Do you need wisdom to walk on God's path? A definitive yes. For all the reasons that we mentioned, and I don't seem to have much room to write down. So I apologize for that, but you heard me say them. This seems like an excellent place to stop in our examination of verses 6 through 8. I was hoping to get a little further, but it won't be in this video, so go ahead and look out for the next one so that we can continue on our journey through Proverbs 2 and continue walking in those paths of uprightness and integrity. At least, let's pray we do. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.